A new team is formed by the World Health Organization. Its goal to push forward a new phase of study on the origin of the pandemic. 3 pet cats test positive for the virus in China, but authorities quickly stepped in, putting the animals down despite their owners' objections. A failed rocket launch in China. It's the 4th this year for Beijing. What do China's ugliest buildings look like? An annual competition titled China's Top 10 Ugliest Buildings is showing them off. Following fierce accusations, U.S. General Mark Milley defends his phone calls with China. He called them an effort to avoid conflict. And Japan will soon have a new leader. The incoming prime minister has pledged to counter Beijing's growing influence. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Today we have a short explainer before we turn to our daily news section. Some viewers voiced confusion over our report yesterday on the return of 2 American siblings. To clarify, Beijing did release 2 Americans after the U.S. cut a deal with China. Here's the context. The Department of Justice allowed Huawei executive W.H.O to return to China. After that, Beijing released the 2 Michaels from Canada, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. China also allowed 2 Chinese-American siblings to return home after barring them from leaving China for 3 years. The siblings are Victor Liu and Cynthia Liu. Victor is a student studying at Georgetown University. Cynthia Liu works for the management consulting firm McKinsey Company. They are both staying in New York after their return to the U.S. Beijing held them in China in hopes of forcing their father to return to the country. Their father is one of Beijing's most wanted fugitives and a former bank executive. Authorities accuse him of implementing a major case of Chinese bank fraud involving over $1 billion. Now for an update on the pandemic. The World Health Organization, or WHO, is looking to push forward a new study on the origin of the CCP virus, the disease that causes COVID-19. We call it the Chinese Communist Party virus to reflect on how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up and mismanagement allowed the virus to spread throughout China and create a global pandemic. WHO Director General Tedros announced on Tuesday that he expects all countries, including China, to collaborate in the second phase of the study. The first phase took place earlier this year. A WHO-led investigation team had visited the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak, starting in late 2019. During the 4-week-long visit, the scientists spent just a couple of hours inside the Wuhan Virology Institute. This research center has long been the subject of speculation about the origins of the CCP virus. The WHO also accused Beijing of refusing to give the scientists the access to all the information they asked for. Now, for the second phase of the effort, a new team of about 20 scientists is being assembled to hunt for new evidence. Tedros discussed the move at an event on trade and the pandemic in Switzerland. He expressed hope that the next phase of the study would begin as soon as possible. Some unsavory news from China. 3 pet cats that tested positive for the virus were put down by authorities despite their owner's objection. It happened in the northeastern Chinese city of Harbin, where a new surge of the virus outbreak has struck. The incident triggered anger on social media in China. Some people see it as needless slaughter. Chinese state media Beijing News reported on Tuesday the owner of the cats was diagnosed with the infection last week. Local health officials then euthanized her 3 cats, which also tested positive later. A virologist said the cats didn't have to be killed. She said it doesn't seem very realistic that the cats would be a risk for their owner to recontract COVID. Scientists also say there's no evidence that pets play a major role in spreading the virus to people. Some Chinese social media users posted online saying, "I disagree with this approach." And to put it bluntly, it's a crude, simplistic, and lazy form of management, just in order to dodge responsibility. Beijing News deleted its report from its social media channels on Wednesday. The city of Harbin went into semi-shutdown last week, and as China's week-long national holiday approaches, the city's residents have been told to stay home and avoid travel. Multiple infection clusters emerged in the provincial capital of Harbin in the past week, yet local officials said on Tuesday the source of the latest infections still remains unclear. Beijing has punished 9 local officials for failing to contain the outbreak. An online video shows a carrier rocket's wreckage after falling into a densely populated area in southern China's Guangxi Autonomous Region. The footage shows the aftermath of a Chinese satellite failure. China state media reported that a new satellite China sent into space on Monday appeared abnormal after it entered orbit, and then the rocket failed. It was launched from southwestern China's Sichuan province. The video shows a big chunk of the wreckage turning in the air. There is no evidence that the U.S. ban of high-end chips to China is related to the failure, but it is a fact that before the ban, failed rocket launches were rare. But after the ban was introduced, many more failures were reported from China. Earlier this month, a rocket failed to bring a satellite into orbit in China's northwestern Gansu province, and there were 2 other similar incidents this year. Launch failure is not the only problem. Another issue is more worrying for the people on the ground, a chance that the rocket's wreckage could fall onto their homes. In 2019, a rocket's wreckage fell on houses, causing a fire. And 3 years ago, a rocket wreckage even caused an explosion. China's Evergrande has run out of cash and is now hundreds of billions of dollars in debt. Its crisis has pushed many suppliers to the brink of bankruptcy. One supplier said the group had not paid him since June. NTD's Xiaohua has more.
This is Guo, a supplier for China's Evergrande Group. The firm provides cleaning and repair services for the property giant's apartments. But the payments stopped in June. Evergrande has run short of cash and is now over $300 billion in debt. The crisis has pushed Guo's firm, which employs hundreds and many others, to the brink of bankruptcy. Guo is now struggling to pay debts and wages.
There's no way around it this time. I have to sell the car. If I don't sell my car and Evergrande doesn't give me money, I won't be able to pay back my bank loan.
In a scramble to find cash, Guo is selling his Porsche and put his apartment on the market.
Let me sit in my car one more time. It was quite sad to sit in my own car for the last time. Goodbye to my car.
Guo says he has been working with Evergrande since 2017. The group accounted for 90% of his business when he started facing problems in June. Evergrande did not respond to a request for comment.
In this situation, there is nothing much we can do. We visited their head and contact person, and they said they couldn't pay us without money. When we asked when it would be paid, they said they don't know.
Guo's company receives digital commercial papers in payment for Evergrande. It then takes 1 year before they can start clearing, and then another year before payment. Recent missed payments have pushed Guo's bottom line into the red.
I can tell you from the bottom of my heart, I haven't had a good night's sleep since June. What we can do now is just trust the government will help us to solve it. But I have also prepared for the worst possible scenario, which is the company going bankrupt.
But Beijing has been largely quiet on the Evergrande situation. Even the group has rattled global markets and left investors and buyers of unfinished apartments, and triggered protests at his offices this month. Guo had been planning to hand his business over to his son so that he and his wife could travel abroad. That plan was thwarted, first by the pandemic and then by Evergrande's crisis.
包总你好。
你好，那这样子吧，我明天去一下那个广发银行那边以后，我就直接开到你4S店把车给你了，就明天直接去办手续了，好不好？
好，可以。
好。
好，谢谢支持。好。好，明天见。
好，拜拜。
拜拜。
Before the payments suddenly stopped, Guo had a team of 300 cleaning thousands of apartments at an Evergrande property, most of them migrants from less wealthy provinces in China. Now, Evergrande owes them over $3 million. Xiaohua Li, NTD News.
The annual competition to find China's top 10 ugliest buildings has begun. Candidates include bridges, gates, hotels, and even a church. Let's see some. Currently, top of the list is a gate at Zhejiang University, one of China's oldest and most prestigious higher education institutions. The gate has a width of 88 meters or almost 290 feet. It's equal to 6 basketball fields put together shoulder to shoulder. Suggested criteria for this competition include having an extremely unreasonable structural function, or a building could qualify by being extremely incongruous with the surrounding environment and natural conditions. A comment asks what's the purpose of this gate, saying there is no road at the entrance, no passageway for cars or people. What's it for? Second on the list is a suspension bridge in the southwestern province of Sichuan. The towers of this bridge are two pairs of men and women dressed in traditional costumes, which some say are terrifying. They compare the people at the foot of the lady to ants at the foot of an elephant. The third is a violin-shaped church in the southern province of Guangdong. The church is built amid old buildings. The structure makes people ask if the church has anything to do with a violin. The fourth is a hotel in the shape of Russian nesting dolls. The building is part of a themed resort in Inner Mongolia. The hotel combines a glass curtain wall, European-style building base, transparent interior structure, and cloister-style sightseeing platform. But the comments for this are mostly positive. A person says, as a tourist building, it's actually not bad. The shape and interior are quite distinctive. Some say they like it and that it's not ugly as a tourist attraction. The next in line is an art museum for children in central China's Xi'an city, which is said to cause agglomeration phobia. The online voting is open until December, and results will be out by the end of the year. General Mark Milley on Tuesday defended his controversial call to his Chinese counterpart, saying his task at that time was to de-escalate.
My loyalty to this nation, its people, and the Constitution hasn't changed and will never change as long as I have a...
Testifying before the Senate, General Mark Milley says he was conducting his duties when he spoke to his Chinese counterpart over the phone.
My task at that time was to de-escalate. My message again was consistent. Stay calm, steady, and de-escalate. We are not going to attack you.
Reports of the calls first emerged in a new book by two Washington Post journalists. The book describes how Milley made two supposedly secret calls to Chinese General Li Zhuocheng and had promised to warn China if the U.S. decides to attack. Milley confirmed the calls, but denied they were secret.
The specific purpose of the October and January calls were generated by concerning intelligence, which caused us to believe the Chinese were worried about an attack on them by the United States.
Some in Congress condemned Milley and have demanded his resignation. But Milley defended the phone calls, saying he had no intention of usurping authority.
At no time was I attempting to change or influence the process, usurp authority, or insert myself in the chain of command.
The Tuesday hearing largely focused on the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, but questions swerved into the calls. Republican Senator Dan Sullivan challenged Milley, telling Reuters Milley would be executed for that kind of behavior in China. Other senators also urged President Joe Biden to fire him, but Biden indicated earlier he stood behind Milley.
The U.S. Secretary of Commerce is accusing Beijing of preventing Chinese airlines from buying U.S. aircraft. She has also accused the regime of human rights abuses and stealing intellectual property.
The U.S. is accusing Beijing of violating a trade deal between the two countries and hindering Chinese companies from purchasing Boeing airplanes. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said on Monday the Chinese government prevented its domestic airlines from buying tens of billions of dollars of U.S.-manufactured Boeing airplanes. She said similar in a previous interview with National Public Radio, accusing China of stealing U.S. intellectual property rights and creating all kinds of barriers for U.S. companies to do business in China. China accounts for a quarter of Boeing's global market. But continuing deterioration of U.S.-China relations has added uncertainty to the prospects for cooperation between Boeing and China. Dave Calhoun is Boeing's president and chief executive officer. He says, "We cannot afford to be locked out of that market." China's foreign ministry responded days later, saying China hopes the U.S. can follow market principles and work with Beijing.
Looking at another issue tied to U.S.-China relations, all eyes seem to be on Japan. That's because the nation has just learned who will become its next leader. The man's name is Fumio Kishida. He just won the leadership vote from Japan's ruling party and is set to become the country's prime minister. His new position means he'll play a critical role in America's China strategy down the road. It has to do with Japan's unique role. The country is one of America's most important allies in Asia for several reasons. It's the world's third largest economy and also maintains a robust military. On top of that, Japan is sitting at a location crucial to America's safety. It's part of an island chain that stretches all the way to Malaysia. And this island chain is a line of defense between Beijing and the west coast of the U.S., as it makes it hard for Beijing to launch submarine-based nuclear attacks. As for Kishida, he has said dealing with China will be a top priority. And in terms of defense, he wants Japan to have missile strike capabilities to counter countries like China and North Korea. He said even though Japan can't strike first, it needs to have the ability to strike back if it gets hit. He added, don't we need to have the ability to block the other side's missile attack ability? That's the problem I'm pointing out. He's also concerned about China's advancing military technology, like hypersonic missiles. He says the other side's technology is advancing every day, and that beefing up Japan's defense is a very important political issue. Kishida has also expressed concerns about a potential Beijing invasion of Taiwan. He says Taiwan is on the front line of a potential clash, and if anything goes wrong, Japan needs to be prepared. But he points out that Japan can't act on its own and that it needs to conduct simulations with the U.S. Though Kishida doesn't support the idea of Japan getting nuclear submarines, these kinds of submarines would greatly enhance a country's combat ability, as they are faster, quieter, and can operate underwater for longer. China's Vast Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, is facing rising opposition from targeted countries as their debts mount. That's according to a study from Aid Data on Wednesday. Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping launched BRI in 2013. Beijing has been providing enormous loans to developing countries that can barely afford the projects. Some call Beijing's ambitious initiative a global trial of trouble or debt-trap diplomacy, and so on. Study from a U.S. research lab, Aid Data, shows that BRI is facing major backlashes abroad. One of the study's authors, Brad Park, says a growing number of policymakers in low and middle income countries are mothballing high-profile BRI projects because of overpricing, corruption, and debt sustainability concerns. The Aid Data study did the research on over 13,000 projects in more than 150 countries. The study lasts for 18 years, and the total value of projects studied has nearly $850 billion. Park says China's average annual international development finance is more than twice that of the U.S. in any given year. Survey found that over one-third of the BRI projects are trapped in corruption, labor violations, and pollutions. BRI also brings credit risks to many countries. Many low and middle-income countries' debts owing China now exceeding 10% of their gross domestic product, or GDP. In June, the U.S. announced a G7 initiative known as Build Back Better World. The initiative is aiming to provide financial support for developing nations for their infrastructure constructions. Some say that may help to squeeze Beijing out. According to a French report, Confucius institutes are facing a growing backlash around the world. Billed as educational programs, they are suspected of conducting espionage for the Chinese Communist Party. One of these institutes in France has received public funding, which stirred up controversy. NTD's David Vivez has the story.
The Confucius Institute in Angers, France, will be given 40,000 euros by a regional council. Confucius Institutes are promoted as education centers for Chinese language and culture. They are run by Hanban, an organization under the Chinese Ministry of Education that promotes communist ideology and the agenda of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. The council's decision has been denounced by MP Guillaume Garot, who said the institute is a means of espionage for the CCP. Garot quotes a 650-page report released last week by a think tank attached to the French Ministry of Armed Forces, saying China uses networks to infiltrate foreign countries. According to the report, the Confucius Institutes allow the CCP to expand its influence and also serve as a way to build a network with local politicians. The institutes are mostly created within universities. The report also says the CCP then uses the institutes to reinforce ties with the universities. It proposes funding for the universities from Chinese groups, which allow the CCP to infiltrate the university, control the narrative on China, and even conduct espionage activities. According to the head of a local human rights association, the institute in Angers should not have received the funding.
Not all institutes are funded, but most of them receive about 35 to 40,000 euros from local politicians. There are so many associations, charities, and programs for the youth that have to shut down, and yet the institute received 40,000 euros. This is a shame.
Guiraud said most of the institutes in France are funded half by public subvention and half by the Chinese Communist regime via hanban. She added that in total, 17 institutes receive about 600,000 euros a year from public funds. But according to the military report, the institutes are facing growing opposition around the world due to their reputation for espionage activity.
The director of the Confucius Institute in Brussels was arrested 2 years ago because he was suspected to be a spy. He was allegedly there to recruit spies for the CCP and has been banned from the EU for 8 years.
Guiraud says for years she sent letters to local politicians who support funding to the institutes, some of whom seemed friendly to the Chinese regime.
I would say I was met with a great silence from some of them.
But she says there's hope, as some cities and councils across France have suspended their funding to Confucius institutes or even closed them. David Vives, NTD News.
The UK is forcing a Chinese business to sell its stake in a nuclear power station. This as relations between London and Beijing cool off. And the UK takes another look at Chinese involvement in its critical infrastructure. NTD's Patrick Hayden in London has more.
China's CGN currently owns a 20% stake in a proposed nuclear plant in the UK called Sizewell C. Having China deeply involved with critical infrastructure is an ever-increasing security concern for the UK government. The Financial Times reports the government plans to force the sale of the Chinese stake.
We should never have got ourselves into the deluded belief that the only way the UK could raise capital for its long-term economic and energy mix for the future was to turn to China.
CGN is a US blacklisted company and is considered to have ties to the Chinese military. The UK government has been slower to recognise the security threat. Forcing the sale of the Chinese ownership will likely mean the government will own the stock, while a decision is made how to structure the company.
But look, let's be clear, the IPO is just one of the many inventive ways we have of being able to raise capital in this country. As the global hub of international finance, we can, with some ease, find access to capital markets necessary to build these infrastructure projects.
Armstrong says the UK should spread its investments across smaller nuclear plants so there is enough nuclear power to support renewable sources.
But there are now more options on the table than ever before. The advent of small and medium-sized reactors offer the ability to create low-risk, spread-out energy mix that can make a good local solid contribution without the need to resort to mega investment packages that have sent us into the arms of China.
CGN's 20% stake in the nearly $27 billion plant is worth nearly $5.5 billion. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.